This video is brought to you by Ground News. This Sunday, nearly 60 million people will be eligible to vote in Germany's 2025 federal election. The results will be watched closely, not just within the EU, but also beyond, as an indicator of political mood in Europe's biggest democracy. So in this video, we'll take a look at Germany's upcoming election, the latest polls, and what the next coalition government might look like. If endless bad news is getting you down, then you might enjoy our rather silly series, TLDR's Race Across Europe, where the TLDR team competed to meet as many audience members as possible across the continent. The whole series is linked in the description. First though, let's start by running through the parties that are standing. There are 29 parties standing in this federal election, 10 of which are running in all 16 German states. These are the Social Democratic Party, or SPD, the Greens, the Free Democratic Party, or FDP, the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, the Left, Free Voters, Volt, the Marxist-Leninist Party of Germany, the Germany Alliance, and the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, or BSW. The Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, is also running in 15 out of 16 states, with its affiliated party, the Christian Social Union, or CSU, running in Bavaria. According to an Infratest DIMAP poll published last week, the centre-right CDU-CSU is polling first on 32%, followed by the AfD on 21%, which would be a record result for the party usually considered far-right. Then polling in joint third place on 14% are the incumbents, the centre-left SPD and the Greens. Next is the Left Party on 6%, which is apparently seeing a pre-election boost that's also reflected in other polls, such as this one by YouGov, which puts the party as high as 9%. Then lower down still, there's the centre-right FDP and conservative left BSW, which are each polling between 4 and 5%. If this poll is accurate, these two parties risk missing out on parliamentary seats, as parties have to secure at least a 5% vote share to enter the Bundestag. If the FDP and BSW do fail to reach 5%, it would be a bad result for both of them. The FDP would follow its exit from Germany's government at the end of last year with an exit from parliament completely, while BSW, which previously surged in support after the European elections in June, would have failed to prove itself an electoral threat to both the AfD and the left. But of course, the election hasn't happened yet, and no poll is definitive, so we'll have to wait for the actual results on Sunday. However, it's widely expected that the CDU will lead Germany's next government, so the juicier question is which party, or parties, it could go into coalition with. This brings us on to the main part of our video. What might Germany's next government look like? Given the country's multi-party federal electoral system, it'll almost certainly be a coalition, as a single party rarely wins over 50% of the vote. So after Sunday's election, if CDU leader Friedrich Merz does become Germany's next Chancellor as expected, he'll need one or maybe two coalition partners. There's several possible combinations here, all with some pretty funky names based on the party's colours. Looking at two-party coalitions, according to the latest Infratest DIMAP poll, 32% of Germans support a grand coalition between the centre-right CDU and centre-left SPD. 17% support a black-blue coalition between the CDU and far-right AfD, although this is unlikely and we'll explain why later in the video. 16% support a black-green Kiwi coalition between the CDU and the Greens, and 11% support a black-yellow coalition between the CDU and FDP. Then, looking at possible three-party combinations, there's the German coalition of the CDU, SPD and FDP, the Jamaica coalition of the CDU, Greens and the FDP, and the Kenya coalition of the CDU, SPD and the Greens. However, some of these coalitions seem more likely than others. Firstly, according to experts from the Eurasia Group speaking to Reuters, the CDU-SPD Grand Coalition is the most likely, with a 60% probability. Germany has had multiple grand coalitions in the past, notably under CDU leader Angela Merkel, and two-party coalitions are generally viewed as more stable than three-party ones. However, due to their ideological differences, if they decide to form a government in 2025, the CDU and SPD will have to find common ground on several important issues. For instance, while the CDU wants to cut corporation tax and undo the previous government's policies tackling the climate crisis, as well as the EU sustainability reporting requirements, the SPD wants to introduce a financial transaction tax on income from capital, and is firmly committed to the European Green Deal. Next up, with a 15% probability, according to the Eurasia Group, is the CDU Greens Kiwi coalition. This looks less likely than the Grand Coalition because of the two parties' clashing views on climate policy and immigration. This dispute came into the spotlight earlier this year, when Merz presented a hardline immigration bill in Parliament supported by the AfD, which mainstream parties have traditionally had a brandmauer or firewall against working with due to its radical platform. As a result, the Greens were among the staunchest critics of Merz seeking support from the far right, with Germany's Green Vice-Chancellor, Robert Habeck, warning Merz, "Don't do it." Possibly the bigger sign, though, is that Markus Söder, the leader of the CDU's Bavarian sister party, the CSU, has frequently ruled out a Kiwi coalition, which currently governs together in 3 German states, but has never formed a coalition at the national level. Moving on, with a 10% probability, is the Kenya coalition of the CDU, SPD and the Greens. This coalition would likely have even more ideological conflict than the former, given the fact that SPD and the Greens, which have governed together for the past 4 years, are closely aligned on climate and welfare issues, and would be stronger against the CDU in government. Again, while this coalition has governed before at the state level in the late 2010s, it's an unlikely mix, although Merz has said that he would be open to coalition talks with both parties. Finally, the Eurasia Group also gives the German coalition of the CDU, SPD and FDP a 10% probability. This is pretty unlikely, because the FDP recently left Scholz's governing traffic light coalition due to disagreements over the budget, specifically on reforming the debt brake. For context, the debt brake was a fiscal rule introduced in 2009 by Merkel after the financial crash, which limits the German government's annual deficit to 0.35% of GDP and forces the states to maintain balanced budgets. However, as the German economy has stagnated in recent years, there have been growing calls to reform the debt brake to allow for more borrowing and therefore more investment. A poll published last month showed that a majority, or 55% of Germans, now support reforming or abolishing the debt brake. As such, the CDU and SPD, which have left open the possibility of reforming it, would probably not want to restart that debate by inviting the FDP into government. And of course, the FDP may not even make it into Parliament if it doesn't get 5% of the vote. Now, before we finish, we know what you're thinking. But what about the AfD? Well, the simple answer is that all of Germany's parties, including the CDU, have stated that they will not go into coalition with the AfD, due to the traditional firewall against partnering with the far right. In a 4-way TV debate last Sunday, Merz ruled out working with the AfD, saying explicitly that he's open to coalition talks with the SPD and the Greens. However, if the AfD wins a big vote share at the election, that could complicate forming a government. Whatever happens, we'll be watching the election closely on Sunday, and we'll update you on the results first thing next week. There's a lot happening in German politics right now, and actually consuming news is pretty difficult in the current landscape. We're increasingly being flooded by misleading content, algorithmic feeds that just back up our biases, and reductions in fact-checking efforts. It almost feels like people are intentionally making it harder to get to the truth. One way you can cut through the noise is with Ground News, a website and app on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. For example, take this story about the German economy and polarisation. Right away, you can see that the story had at least 58 outlets reporting on it. 44% lean left, while 19% lean right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information, so you can see how reliable the reporting actually is. You can also swipe through some of the headlines to get a more detailed understanding of how reporting might change based on political bias. But my favourite part has to be their blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are being underreported on one side of the political spectrum or the other. This not only helps you redress your personal news bias by reading stories you might otherwise have missed, but also gives you a better perspective on how the media ecosystem is being manipulated and shifted to fit political objectives. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, cutting through opinion and noise with a feed free from manipulation or algorithms, and I can't recommend it enough. In fact, if you subscribe today, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan. That's under $5 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.